Welcome back to the next segment of our interview with Gareth Porter. Gareth just returned from Iran. Gareth is a historian, investigative journalist. Welcome back.
Thank you, Paul.
So here's my contention here, that the national intelligence estimate of all the American intelligence agencies told the world that Iran, there's no evidence Iran wants a bomb, is building a bomb, and if it did, it's years away from one. El-Baradei from the IAEA has said there's no way they can build weaponized uranium and create a program without getting out of the non-proliferation agreement, which they haven't done yet. He says the safeguard system is working. So if I'm Barack Obama and I'm hearing all this, and not just Barack Obama, you could be anyone, even in the current administration, there is no imminent threat from a nuclear program in Iran. So then what is this really all about? And when you listen to Barack Obama on Meet the Press, I think there's a pretty good hint what it's about.
Their funding of terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah, their threats against Israel are contrary to everything that we believe in and what the international community should accept.
Clearly, what is of imminent interest to American interests is Iraq, the SOFA agreement, and the fact that the United States policy has led to a government in Iraq that listens to the Iranians perhaps more than they do the Americans, which I certainly wasn't part of the great strategic objective of the Bush-Cheney team. And then from Israel's point of view, and thus from much of the American point of view, Hamas and Hezbollah are real potent political forces in the region. And the whole issue of Iran as a regional power, especially having emerged with more strength from the Iraq War, Larry Wilkerson, I mentioned in an earlier interview, Powell's former chief of staff, talked about the real significance has been a whole change in the dynamic of the balance of forces in the region. So the nuclear negotiations and all of this are kind of a good ploy, or not ploy, but focal point about the relationship. But is that really what's at stake?
Well, there's no doubt that the nuclear issue is embedded in a much broader set of issues that do have to do with Iran as a regional power, and whether the United States is going to accept that, whether the United States is going to continue to try to contain Iran in terms of its power in the region, to try to continue to be the dominant power, to have a clear hierarchy of power between the United States and Iran in the region or not. And this is where when you talk to Iranian officials and analysts, they're all very well aware that this is really what the ultimate issue is. And what the Iranians are saying, and this is really across the board, regardless of whether they are hardliners or people who are really interested in negotiations with the United States, they're all saying, look, Iran has a position in the region which is so based on natural power, natural sources of influence in the region, that the United States realistically cannot shake that. It cannot change the reality.
A country with an enormous population and a sophisticated economy, and that's where they are.
It's not really that so much as it is the natural affinity, culturally and religiously, between Iran and obviously the Shia in Iraq, the Shia in Lebanon, of course, represented by Hezbollah, and of course the Hamas and other anti-Israeli forces in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. These are affinities which the Iranians say, cannot be changed by the United States either threatening Iran or trying to wield military power in the region. So they have a very strong case here that the United States is simply refusing to recognize the fundamental realities here that cannot be changed. And that's why I think, ultimately the United States does have to reach a new understanding of the geopolitics of this situation.
In one of the debates, Obama said something very interesting. He said, we have to accept Iran as a power in the region. That if you didn't want Iran to be a power in the region, you shouldn't have invaded Iraq.
And ironically, the single thing that has strengthened Iran over the last several years has been the war in Iraq. Iraq was Iran's mortal enemy. That was cleared away. And what we've seen over the last several years is Iran's influence grow.
And he said that in one of the debates. Now, I never heard him say it again. But that was a very interesting piece of insight sort of into the real world, which we haven't heard very much of since.
That's right. And this is why one once in a while has a glimpse of an Obama who departs from, if you will, the Bush the sort of viewpoint on the world and on the Middle East. And one has to believe that Obama is capable of understanding a policy, the need for a policy that goes beyond what Bush was trying to do, not just the absence of military threat to Iran, but the need to really come to terms with Iran. And that's why I think you have this debate within the Iranian regime between those people who really are not that interested in negotiations with the United States and don't really have any hope.
And just to add to that, the choice of Biden was interesting because on Iran, Biden was one of the few people in the primaries who was actually focusing on this issue. I remember a quote from Biden where he said, if you don't want Iran to have a weapons program, don't keep threatening regime change.
If you got word from the U.S. intelligence community that Ahmadinejad and his government were on the verge of having a nuclear bomb capable of hitting targets in the region on missiles, what would you do?
Well, first of all, I would do away with the policy of regime change. What we're saying to everybody in Iran is, look, by the way, give up the one thing that keeps us from attacking you, and after that we're going to attack you. We're going to take you down. It's a bizarre notion.
This is the real logic of, the threat to Iran and pressure on Iran really backfiring, whereas if you recognize Iran's legitimate interests and you're willing to negotiate on the basis of that, you can make a deal. The other point that really I think Americans do not understand about the Iranian viewpoint about relations with the United States is that they really see, at least many of the Iranians, I'm not saying that this is a consensus, but many Iranians across the board, both conservatives and, if you will, the more pro-Western political figures in Iran, are really believe that there's a fundamental coincidence of genuine interest between Iran and the United States because they are both fundamentally opposed to the Sunni extremists.